The forest had a reputation that few dared to speak aloud. Its trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches thick with black thorns that gleamed even in the faintest moonlight. Villagers told stories of those who entered and never returned, swallowed by the forest or claimed by the shadows that thrived beneath the thorny canopy. Yet on that morning, Leora's mother called her to the edge of the village. "Fetch wood," she commanded, her voice sharp but weary. "We cannot wait, and the fire will die if we do not burn what the forest can give us." Leora swallowed, staring at the jagged line where the trees began. She had heard the stories, the whispers, the warnings. Her heart thumped in her chest as she stepped onto the dirt path that led toward the forest's edge. Even before she crossed the threshold of the thorns, a faint wind brushed against her cheek, carrying a strange, pungent scent, earth, decay, and something else, something almost alive. The villagers' eyes followed her, some with pity, some with fear. "Stay on the path," a neighbor called, though her voice quavered. "Do not stray. Do not touch the thorns." But the thorns seemed to move as Leora entered. Not wildly, not as if sentient, but subtly, imperceptibly, curling toward her as she passed. She shook her head, telling herself it was only the wind, the play of shadow and light. Yet when she reached the first pile of dry branches, she could have sworn one of the thorns quivered, as if it had sensed her presence. She gathered what she could carry, her hands pricked by thorns despite her careful movements. Each scratch burned, a reminder of the forest's quiet hostility. And still, the whispers of the trees reached her ears, soft, like a secret language meant only for her. "Take nothing more than needed, beware what follows." By the time she turned to leave, the sun had climbed higher. The forest seemed calmer now, but Leora did not trust its silence. She retraced her steps carefully, branches snapping underfoot. Then, just as the village came into view, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A single thorn, black as night, had caught on her sleeve. And when she brushed it away, more seemed to cling to her, tiny, almost invisible, but moving, writhing as if alive. She shook her arms, dropped the wood, but the thorns clung stubbornly, and with a faint rustling, they began to crawl along her skin. A fear unlike anything she had known gripped her heart. The forest had not let her leave unmarked. When she reached her doorstep, the villagers gasped. Children shrank back, women crossed themselves. "The forest," one whispered, "it sent its anger with you." Leora looked down and saw that her dress, her hair, even the skin along her arms, was dotted with small black thorns, moving slowly as if they had a will of their own. Her mother rushed forward, horrified, trying to brush them off, but each thorn seemed to burrow deeper, leaving trails of dark sap in its wake. The whispers returned, soft as the wind, curling around her mind. The forest watches, it follows, it claims. From that moment, Leora knew her life would never be the same. She had entered the thorn forest for firewood, but it had entered her. The next morning, Leora awoke to the faint prickle of thorns against her skin. At first she thought it a dream, a memory of the forest's cruel touch. But as she swung her legs out of bed, she felt them, tiny black thorns embedded in her ankles, creeping slowly up her calves. Panic rose, but she dared not scream. She remembered the whispers from the forest, soft and sibilant. "We follow. We watch. We grow." Her mother was the first to notice. "Leora," she gasped, dropping a basket of laundry. "Your arms, your legs." She rushed to brush the thorns away, but each one resisted, like it had attached itself with determination. The tiny points burned, leaving trails of dark sap that stained the linen and skin alike. Leora's mother muttered prayers under her breath, crossing herself repeatedly, but even she could not pry the thorns loose. By midday, the villagers had gathered outside her home. Word spread quickly, and whispers turned to fearful speculation. "The forest has cursed her," someone said. "The spirits have marked her." Others dared to look closer. They saw the thorns crawling like tiny serpents along her skin, glistening as if wet with oil or blood. Children shrieked, running to their mothers, while the elders muttered about omens and signs from ancestors. Leora felt their eyes like knives, cutting into her very soul. She wanted to explain, to tell them it was not her doing, that she had simply obeyed her mother's orders. But no words could ease their fear. She could barely stand as the thorns crept higher, covering her arms to the elbows and curling around her fingers. Even when she tried to rub them off, they shifted like living vines, embedding themselves again as if daring her to fight. By evening, Leora realized the thorns were not just growing, they were responding. They twisted toward objects she touched, reaching out toward the fire, the water, even her small collection of herbs by the windowsill. When she tried to move, the thorns tugged slightly against her, not painfully but insistently, like tendrils guiding her movements. Her mother sat beside her, wringing her hands. "What have we done?" she whispered. "I sent you to fetch wood and now this." She looked at the villagers through the doorway, seeing their faces pale with fear. "We must seek the wise woman. There is no other way." Before dawn, the villagers brought their offerings and requests for guidance. Some insisted that Leora be confined, fearing that the thorns would bring disaster to the village. Others, more cautious, argued that she was a sign of something greater, a messenger of the forest or ancestors. The debate swirled like leaves in a storm, but none dared touch her, for even the slightest contact caused the thorns to writhe. That night, Leora lay awake, unable to sleep. She felt the thorns moving, slow but purposeful, spreading across her skin like dark rivers. She wondered if the forest had claimed her as a guardian, a messenger, or a prisoner. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. "We grow. We follow. You're ours." As the days passed, the thorns' influence became impossible to ignore. She could not play with the village children, could not carry water from the well, could barely touch the door latch without feeling the prick of black points. Even her own reflection frightened her. Her arms glimmered faintly in the moonlight, each thorn a dark filament, alive and shifting. One elder finally spoke, stepping forward with caution. "Child," he said softly, "you must seek the herbalist of the old forest paths. Only she may understand what the thorns are and why they follow you. But beware, not all who live near the forest survive its counsel." Leora's chest tightened. She had only gone to the forest for firewood, and now it had become part of her, part of every heartbeat, every movement. She knew she could not remain idle. She had to seek the source, to understand the curse, or blessing, that the forest had laid upon her. The villagers whispered as she packed a small bundle, their eyes darting between fear and awe. Some muttered prayers, some cursed softly, but all watched as Leora stepped beyond the village gates, feeling the thorns pulse in anticipation. With each step, the forest called to her, promising secrets and danger alike. And the thorns followed. The village gates closed behind her, though no one held them shut. Leora's steps carried her into the rising sun, the thorns along her arms and legs pulsing faintly, almost as if they guided her toward something she could not yet see. The forest loomed ahead, darker than she remembered, its twisted branches like blackened fingers reaching into the sky. Birds did not sing. Even the wind seemed hesitant to stir. Every step she took left faint black scratches in the dirt, as if the thorns themselves marked her passage. She could feel them vibrating lightly against her skin, attuned to the forest, urging her forward. Each movement brought a slight sting, not enough to cripple her, but a constant reminder that she was no longer simply Leora of the village. She was something else now, tethered to the forest in ways she could not yet understand. Hours passed. The familiar path quickly disappeared under brambles and thorny overgrowth. Leora paused, noticing the shapes around her shift, subtly rearranging as if watching her. She shivered, pulling her cloak tighter over her arms to hide the crawling black thorns. But hiding was useless. They were part of her now, living extensions of the forest's will. As the sun reached its zenith, she spotted smoke curling between the trees. Relief washed over her. Finally, someone who could help. The smoke led her to a small clearing where an old woman tended a garden of herbs, roots, and flowers, all thriving under the shadow of gnarled trees. Her hair was white as snow, and her eyes shone with a knowing light. "You've come," the woman said before Leora could speak. Her voice was soft, yet carried the weight of authority. "The forest told me you would arrive." Leora stumbled forward. "You know about the thorns? About how they followed me home?" The herbalist nodded. "They always do when the forest has chosen. These are not mere thorns, child. They are sentience, a part of the forest's will. You were marked the moment you stepped into the trees. They will not leave until you understand their purpose, and until the forest believes you are ready." Leora swallowed hard. "But I only went for wood. I didn't ask for this." The woman tilted her head, studying her. "Few ever do. The forest chooses without asking. It is not malice, it is selection. You have a choice now, to resist and suffer its burden, or to learn its secrets and wield its power responsibly." The thorns on Leora's arms twitched at the woman's words. They curled slightly as if eager to listen, eager to learn. The herbalist beckoned her closer, offering a small bowl filled with a glowing green potion. "Drink this. It will calm the thorn's pain and open your senses." You will feel their thoughts, their intentions. Only then can you begin to understand what follows you, and what the forest expects. Leora hesitated, fear gripping her chest. She thought of her village, the frightened faces, the whispers of curses. But she also thought of the shadows in the forest that had called her forward, and the pulsing of the thorns against her skin. Slowly she lifted the bowl and drank. A warmth spread through her body, starting at her stomach and radiating outward. The thorns on her skin glowed faintly, then pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Images flashed before her eyes, roots snaking through soil, animals hiding in thickets, whispers of voices long buried. The forest spoke to her, softly at first, then clearer. She understood the thorns were not just a curse. They were messengers, guides, protectors, and warnings all at once. The herbalist watched silently. The forest has chosen you, child. Whether this is blessing or burden depends on the choices you make from now on. You may return to the village, but it will never be the same. The thorns follow for a reason. You must learn what that reason is, and fast. Danger grows where ignorance persists. Leora felt the weight of her new reality pressing against her. The forest had claimed her. The thorns were her companions, her guardians, and perhaps her judges. And though she longed for the safety of the village, she knew the journey ahead would demand more courage than she had ever summoned before. The herbalist handed her a bundle of roots and dried herbs. Take these. They will sustain you. Tomorrow we begin your lessons. The forest will reveal its secrets, but only to one who listens with more than ears. Leora took a deep breath, the thorns crawling gently along her arms like curious fingers. She stepped deeper into the clearing, into the unknown. Her path was no longer simple. The forest followed, and so did its will. The morning sun filtered through the thick canopy of the forest, turning the shadows into rivers of gold and green. Leora awoke on a bed of moss, the thorns along her arms and legs twitching faintly, as if impatient to begin the day. The herbalist stood nearby, already tending her garden, her hands moving deftly among the herbs as though she were coaxing secrets from the earth itself. Today, the herbalist said without looking up, you will learn to listen. Leora frowned. Listen? I already hear them. They whisper all the time. Not just here, the woman replied. You must understand. The thorns carry the forest's memory, its warnings, its stories. They remember everything, who walked here, who harmed the earth, who asked for mercy. Most fear them, and that fear makes them useless. You, child, must learn patience, focus, and respect. The thorns along Leora's arms quivered at the woman's words. When she flexed her fingers, they shifted, curling slightly as if testing her attention. A pang of unease struck her. Sometimes she thought the thorns could think on their own. Sometimes she feared they might act without her consent. The herbalist handed her a small branch, stripped of leaves but covered in tiny buds. Hold it, she instructed. Feel the life within it. Let the thorns connect. Tell me what you sense. Leora obeyed, gripping the branch tightly. The thorns on her arms prickled and vibrated. At first, all she felt was an uncomfortable buzzing, a friction of consciousness pressing against her skin. Then, slowly visions unfurled behind her closed eyes. She saw a doe running through the underbrush, pursued by hunters. She saw a tree crushed by lightning, its roots curling in pain. She saw a small child leaving food offerings for a spirit in the roots of an ancient oak. It remembers everything, the herbalist said softly. The forest does not forget. Neither should you. The thorns are your connection to it, but they are not your servants. They are your teachers. Listen carefully. For hours Leora practiced. She closed her eyes, breathed in rhythm with the thorns, and allowed them to guide her touch. Tiny black tips twined around her fingers and wrists, brushing against the branch, then along her skin, sending messages and sensations rather than words. Some pricked sharply, warning her. Some softened, urging her toward the right motion. By noon, she could feel the branch's history, the storms it had weathered, the birds that had nested in its limbs, the insects that had passed along its bark. You are beginning, the herbalist said, her eyes glowing with approval. Tomorrow we will speak to the living thorns themselves. They will teach you discipline and perhaps, restraint. For now, remember this, every thorn carries a choice. You may follow its guidance or you may resist. But nothing in this forest moves without reason. After the lesson, Leora wandered the edge of the clearing, watching the thorns along her skin shift gently in rhythm with the wind. They no longer felt like invaders but like extensions of herself. When a stray branch bent toward her, the thorns reached out, gripping and lifting it gently. A thrill ran through her. She realized the forest had given her more than a curse. It had given her connection, power, and awareness. That night Leora dreamed vividly. The thorns extended across the forest floor, forming vast networks, touching every living thing. She walked through them, feeling their pulse, their ancient memory. The voices whispered not just warnings but guidance. Where water ran pure, where berries were ripe, where danger lingered unseen. For the first time she felt a fragile sense of mastery rather than fear. When she awoke, she found her reflection in a pool of water near the clearing. The thorns coiled along her skin like black vines, their tips catching the light. She touched them gently. They recoiled slightly, then settled, almost like obedient companions. Leora understood then that the forest did not follow her because it wished harm. It followed because it had chosen her. And like any choice, it came with responsibility. The herbalist approached quietly, placing a hand on Leora's shoulder. "Tomorrow we leave the clearing," she said. "The forest will test you beyond what you've learned. You must decide if you are ready to embrace the thorns, to carry their will beyond this place. Only then will you begin to understand the full measure of your gift, and your burden." Leora nodded, staring out toward the dense trees beyond the clearing. She could feel the thorns pulsing lightly, anticipation mingling with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The forest had marked her, guided her, and tested her. The real journey was just beginning, and she was no longer merely a girl sent for wood. She was a pupil of the forest, a bearer of its will, and perhaps one day its protector. The thorns followed. And she would follow them wherever they led. The next morning, the herbalist led Leora past the familiar clearing and into the denser, darker heart of the forest. The sunlight barely pierced the canopy here, and the air smelled of damp earth, moss, and something faintly metallic. Every step forward seemed heavier than the last, as though the forest itself resisted her passage. "Today," the herbalist said, "you will face the forest judgment. The thorns will test your spirit, your courage, and your understanding. You may fail. Or you may rise. That depends entirely on your choices." Leora swallowed and tightened her grip on the bundle of roots and herbs she carried. The thorns along her arms and legs quivered in anticipation, almost urging her forward. She realized that their guidance was no longer gentle. The forest expected her to act with intent, to respond to its warnings and challenges with clarity. They came first in silence, shadows between the trunks moving just out of sight. Leora's heart thumped as the whispers rose again, soft, persistent, insistent. "Step carefully. Do not flinch. Know your path." The thorns along her skin responded, curling and stretching as if to create a protective barrier, a map of her safe route through the undergrowth. A sudden gust swept through the trees, bending branches low, and from the shadows leapt a cluster of thorn-covered vines, writhing and snapping. Leora froze, her instincts screaming. The thorns along her skin stiffened, almost quivering with sentience. Then slowly they began to extend outward, moving in rhythm with her heartbeat. She felt them guide her hands and arms, pushing the attacking vines aside just enough to create a path. The vines hissed and recoiled, respecting the strange authority she now carried. Hours passed. Each challenge grew harder. Hidden pits filled with roots, sudden swarms of biting insects, and illusions of spectral wolves with eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. At each trial, the thorns guided her, sometimes whispering, sometimes pressing into her flesh to prod her in the right direction. She felt herself listening not just with ears, but with her entire being, sensing the forest's intent in every prickle, every pulse. By noon, exhaustion weighed her down, but she pressed on. A clearing emerged, sun striking through the canopy like golden spears. At its center was a pool of crystal-clear water, its surface still, reflecting the forest above. The herbalist stepped forward, nodding solemnly. "The final test," she said. "You must drink from the pool. Only then will the forest acknowledge your understanding, your courage, your respect for its will." Leora approached cautiously. The thorns along her skin vibrated softly, almost like a warning. She gazed into the water and saw not just her reflection, but flashes of the forest itself. The twisted trees, the unseen creatures, the hidden dangers and wonders. She could feel the thorns pulse, reading her resolve, gauging her readiness. She knelt and drank. The water was cool, refreshing, and it seemed to flow through her, cleansing her, connecting her to every root, every leaf, every living thing in the forest. Her vision widened. She could see the paths the animals traveled, the hidden streams beneath the earth, and even the ancient spirits who lingered among the trees. The thorns shivered with recognition, tightening along her arms and legs as if to say, "You understand. You are ready." When she rose, the herbalist stepped closer, placing a hand on Leora's shoulder. "The forest has accepted you," she said softly. "From this day forward, You are no longer merely a girl sent for firewood. You are a daughter of the forest, bound to its will and entrusted with its secrets. The thorns are no longer just marks, they are part of you and you part of them. Leora looked down at her arms. The thorns had softened, glowing faintly in the filtered sunlight, no longer restless or aggressive. She felt a surge of pride and awe. The forest had tested her and she had not faltered. The journey back to the village would not be easy, the herbalist warned. The villagers would still fear her, still whisper of curses and omens. But now Leora understood herself in a way she never had before. She carried the forest in her very flesh, a living bridge between the wild and the village. As they walked back, the thorns shifted slightly, guiding her through safer paths, avoiding the dangers that could have ensnared an untrained traveler. Leora realized then that the forest's lessons were ongoing. She would never be free of the thorns, nor would she want to be. They were her allies, her teachers, and, if she learned their full wisdom, perhaps the key to protecting her village from threats it could not yet imagine. And somewhere, deep within the shadows of the forest, she heard the faintest rustle of acknowledgement. The forest had chosen well. The village lay ahead, bathed in the late afternoon sun, its familiar cottages and dirt paths now seeming smaller, fragile, and somehow insignificant to Leora. She felt the thorns along her arms and legs, coiling gently as if sensing the tension in the air. They pulsed lightly, warning her that this encounter would demand more than courage, it would demand authority, patience, and a command over fear. As she approached the village square, whispers erupted. Windows cracked open. Children peered around corners. Women dropped their chores and clasped amulets to their chests. The elders emerged first, their eyes wide, mouths trembling as they whispered prayers and incantations meant to ward off curses. Is it her? Has the forest returned its curse? Someone murmured. Leora stepped forward, and the thorns along her arms lifted subtly, like the protective bars of a gate, their tips glinting in the sun. Villagers froze, some stepping back in terror, others bowing instinctively to her presence. She realized then that the forest had not merely marked her, it had given her an aura of power that demanded recognition. Her mother rushed forward, relief and fear mingling in her expression. Leora, she cried. Child, come inside, these people, they fear you. Leora shook her head. No, she said, her voice steady, carrying across the square. It is not me they should fear. It is ignorance and the lack of understanding. The forest thorns are not curses, they are protection, guidance, memory. I am their vessel, yes, but not their weapon against you unless you threaten them or me. The villagers murmured among themselves, some still cowering, others curious. A few of the bolder men stepped closer. Child, we feared you would bring ruin upon us, one said. The thorns, they move on your skin. We have never seen such things. Leora lowered her arms, letting the thorns relax, curled gently like living vines. See how they respect me, not you? That is how you should learn. Respect and listen, not fear and harm. I have walked the paths you dare not imagine. I have learned the forest's wisdom. And now I bring that knowledge here, to protect, not destroy. A hush fell over the crowd. Eyes darted between her and the shifting black thorns, which seemed almost alive under the sunlight. The children, previously frightened, began inching closer, curiosity overtaking fear. Birds chirped softly in the distance as though acknowledging her words. Her father approached cautiously, guilt written in every line of his face. Leora, I sent you into the forest thinking it was a simple errand. I never imagined, his voice faltered. The thorns twitched, sensing his fear and remorse but did not lash out. Leora met his eyes steadily. You cannot undo what was done, she said. But you can learn. And so can everyone else here. Fear blinds you but understanding protects. The forest chose me but it did not choose hatred. I am the bridge, between you, the village and the world beyond the trees. Her mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Child, forgive us for doubting you. Forgive our fear. Leora's gaze softened, though the thorns along her arms remained poised, a subtle reminder of the power she now bore. I forgive you. But you must learn. The forest watches, the thorns remember, and ignorance invites danger. You will not survive if you ignore it again. An elder, quivering with both awe and fear, spoke. If what you say is true, then we must respect the forest, and respect you. Teach us, child. Show us the way. Help us understand before it is too late. The villagers began to bow, some out of fear, some out of reverence. The black thorns pulsed lightly, spreading along her skin like ribbons of shadowed authority. Leora realized in that moment that she had changed irrevocably. She was no longer just a village girl sent for firewood. She was a guardian, a conduit for the forest's will and a teacher of its wisdom. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the square, Leora felt the thorns relax completely for the first time since she had returned. They had guided her, protected her, and now acknowledged that their purpose here was clear. She had walked the path of trial and returned, not with vengeance, but with understanding, and the villagers would never see her the same way again. The forest's whispers remained faint at the edges of her mind, promising more lessons, more growth. The thorns had followed her home, yes, but they had not come to harm. They had come to prepare her. And Leora was ready to embrace whatever came next. Weeks passed since Leora returned to the village, and yet unease lingered in the air. The villagers had begun to accept her presence, though fear still flickered in their eyes whenever the thorns along her arms and legs shifted or pulsed. She had settled into a new rhythm, teaching what she had learned from the herbalist, guiding those who sought understanding of the forest, and maintaining a careful watch over the village. But the forest, it seemed, had more trials in store. It began subtly, a low, almost imperceptible rustling at the edges of the village. At first, the villagers dismissed it as wind or the movements of small animals. Leora, however, felt the disturbance immediately. The thorns along her skin stiffened and twitched, sending faint pulses through her veins. Something was approaching, and it was neither human nor ordinary. By midday, the signs became undeniable. Crops were trampled in strange circular patterns. Chickens disappeared from coops, and the distant cries of animals echoed unervingly from the treeline. Villagers whispered of spirits or curses, their fear mounting. Leora stepped into the village square, her black thorns glinting in the sun. "This is not a curse," she called out, her voice firm, carrying over the frightened murmurs. "Something from the forest approaches. We must prepare, not panic." Many turned toward her with wide eyes. Children clutched their mothers' skirts and men gripped their tools like weapons. Leora could feel the thorns pulsing in response to the rising tension, their black tips curling and stretching in subtle patterns as if scanning for the danger. Late that afternoon, a shadow appeared at the forest's edge. At first it was barely visible, a dark, shifting mass among the trees, but as it approached, Leora could see its form. A creature woven from brambles, thorns and shadows, its movements fluid and predatory. It paused briefly as if sensing her presence and then surged forward. The villagers screamed, scattering in panic. Leora stood her ground. She raised her arms, feeling the thorns extend slightly, their tips shimmering faintly. They formed a subtle barrier, a web of protective shadows between her and the advancing creature. The creature lunged, snapping with thorn-covered limbs. The thorns along Leora's arms pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, guiding her movements. She stepped aside, twisting gracefully, and the creature's attack glanced off the protective thorns. With a mental focus she had not fully realized she possessed, Leora extended her senses into the thorns themselves, commanding them with intention. They moved like extensions of her will, curling outward to entangle the creature, slowing it, binding it. The forest's whispers filled her mind: focus, control, protect, do not fear. With a final effort, Leora pushed the thorns forward, piercing the creature's bramble body. It shrieked, an unearthly sound that chilled the blood, and then collapsed, dissolving into shadows that scattered harmlessly into the surrounding trees. The villagers stared, mouths open, at the empty space where the creature had stood. Slowly realization dawned. They were safe, not by chance but because Leora and the thorns that had followed her home had protected them. Her mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Child, how did you?" Leora lowered her arms, the thorns retracting gently. "They are not merely thorns," she said softly. "They are the forest's memory, its judgment, its protection. And now you see, they are part of me as I am part of the forest. Those who respect it may live, those who threaten it, they face consequences." The villagers whispered among themselves, some still fearful, others awed. Children crept closer, daring to touch the edges of her cloak, marveling at the strange black filaments that seemed alive. That evening, Leora returned to the clearing where she had met the herbalist, though the woman was nowhere to be found. The forest seemed to hum in approval. The thorns along her arms and legs curled gently, a soft pulse echoing her own heartbeat. She had faced danger and emerged not only unscathed but stronger, more connected to the forest than ever before. In the quiet of the night, as the village slept, Leora sat at the edge of the square, feeling the thorns shift and move with a life of their own. She understood now that the forest's protection was not passive. It was active, discerning, and sometimes fierce. And she also understood the responsibility that came with it, to mediate between the wild and the human, to guard her people, and to maintain the balance the forest demanded. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the faint rustle of the forest seemed to echo a single sentiment: "You are ours and we are yours. Together we endure." Leora allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The Thorns had followed her home, and in doing so, they had made her something more than herself. She was no longer just a girl, she was a guardian, a bridge between the village and the wild. And she would not fail. The days after the bramble creature's attack brought uneasy calm. The villagers whispered, still fearful, yet reluctant to deny the power that had saved them. Leora moved among them cautiously, letting the thorns along her arms and legs shimmer softly, a silent reminder that the forest's vigilance never rested. Then the news came. From beyond the village, a distant scout returned with a warning. A group of outsiders, hunters and poachers, had entered the outer edges of the forest. They carried axes and saws, seeking rare timber, herbs, and perhaps more. They would not respect the forest. They would not respect her. Leora felt a tightening in her chest. The thorns along her skin pulsed sharply, their tips curling as if in anticipation. She could sense the ripples of the forest's fear and anger, the leaves trembling and the branches bending toward her like silent allies. These intruders threatened not just the trees and creatures, but the delicate balance she had been entrusted to maintain. She gathered the village elders, speaking with measured authority. They do not know the forest. They will not listen. We cannot allow them to destroy what has protected us, and what has chosen me as its guardian. We must act, swiftly, wisely, and together. Some villagers nodded reluctantly, others crossed themselves. Fear lingered, but respect now tempered it. Leora instructed the hunters among the villagers to stay close and follow her guidance. Every step she took caused the thorns to pulse with energy, extending subtly outward, brushing against the soil and leaves as though communicating silently with the forest itself. As they approached the forest's edge, Leora felt the thorns tighten along her skin, a living network of alertness and anticipation. Birds scattered, small animals froze, and the wind carried a low, mournful whisper. The outsiders were unaware, talking loudly as they hacked at small saplings, breaking branches, oblivious to the signs around them. Leora raised her hands, letting the thorns shift and extend. They moved like serpentine shadows along the forest floor, guiding vines and undergrowth to subtly tangle the intruders' feet. The hunters cursed, stepping into hidden pits, tripping over roots they could not see. Each stumble, each misstep increased their frustration. "You cannot stop progress," one shouted, swinging an axe at a tree which bent unnaturally to avoid the blow. Leora felt a ripple of satisfaction as the thorns gently tugged against the saplings, redirecting the intruder's path without harming him physically. The forest did not kill. It only defended. The outsiders began to panic as shadows shifted unnaturally around them. The thorns along Leora's skin coiled higher, brushing against the branches overhead. From the treetops, birds dove and crows cawed, sending flocks in chaotic patterns. The forest's whispers grew louder, almost a chant. "Leave. Leave. Leave." Finally, the leader of the hunters, a tall man with sharp eyes, looked around in confusion. His companions were tangled, lost, and frightened. He glimpsed Leora at the forest edge, her black thorns glinting ominously, eyes steady, radiating authority. His voice faltered. We should go," he muttered. Leora's voice rang clear across the small clearing. "Leave now and harm nothing further. Respect this forest, or you will not leave a tree standing, nor will you leave unscathed. This is not a threat. This is balance. Choose wisely." The leader hesitated, sensing that the forest itself responded to her command. Slowly he turned, gathering his companions. Each step away was cautious, almost reverent, as though the thorns and the forest shadows were following them, ensuring they understood the stakes. When they finally disappeared into the distant trees, the villagers exhaled collectively. Fear had not vanished, but awe and respect had grown stronger. Leora's presence, coupled with the forest's power manifested in the thorns, had protected them once more. That night, she stood at the edge of the village, the thorns along her arms and legs glowing faintly in the moonlight. The whispers of the forest were soft now, approving, almost proud. She knew this was only the beginning. The thorns had followed her home, yes, but they were not mere appendages. They were guides, protectors, and teachers, bound to her, yet extending their will into the village she had sworn to protect. She looked toward the forest, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the quiet hum of unseen life. The threat had been repelled, But Leora knew that the forest would always test her, always demand her vigilance. The thorns were part of her now. And through them, the forest's voice would continue to speak, warning, teaching, protecting, and preparing her for whatever trials lay ahead. The villagers slept, unaware of the full extent of what had transpired. Leora, however, felt it deeply. She was no longer simply a girl touched by the forest. She was its guardian, its voice in the human world, and the thorns that followed her home would ensure that both forest and village endured in harmony. The night was thick with mist, curling through the village streets and the edges of the forest like ghostly fingers. Leora sat on a hill overlooking her home, the thorns along her arms and legs glowing faintly in the silver light of the moon. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily on her mind, the forest trials, the bramble creature, the intruders. And yet, despite the victories, a question lingered. Why had the forest chosen her so completely? The answer came unexpectedly. As she traced the glowing tips of the thorns with her fingers, a faint pulse traveled up her arms and into her chest. It was a rhythm, almost musical, vibrating in perfect synchrony with her heartbeat. Images flashed in her mind, the forest centuries ago untouched by humans, its rivers, animals and trees thriving in perfect balance. A young girl walking barefoot, reaching into the heart of the wild, and the thorns themselves growing from the earth, sentient, patient, watching, waiting. Leora gasped. The thorns were not merely protective, they were sentinels of the forest's memory, keepers of its history and wisdom. And they had waited for her. The forest whispered in the language only she could hear. You are the chosen. You carry our voice. You walk between worlds human and wild. Protect balance. Learn, guide, endure. Images continued to flow. She saw the countless humans who had harmed the forest, those who had ignored its warnings. She saw how the thorns had moved quietly through generations, protecting, punishing, guiding, and teaching. And now, the pulse brought one final revelation. The thorns were a gift and a responsibility, a bond between her and the forest that could not be severed. The understanding filled her with awe and a quiet fear. She could feel the immense responsibility pressing against her chest. She was not simply a girl returned from the forest. She was a guardian, a mediator, and perhaps the forest's emissary to the village and the wider world. The herbalist appeared suddenly, stepping from the shadows like a whisper made flesh. Her eyes shone with knowing light. You see now, don't you? She asked gently. Leora nodded, swallowing hard. They are alive. They remember everything. They've chosen me, but I don't yet understand everything they want. The herbalist smiled faintly. You never will fully. The forest is eternal. Its wisdom is infinite. But you must learn to listen, interpret, and act. That is enough. The thorns guide you, they do not dictate you. Their will flows through you, yes, but your choices remain yours alone. That is why you were chosen. Courage, humility, and heart. Leora looked down at the thorns curling along her skin, tracing their pattern like the veins of some living map. She realized the truth. These thorns were not merely protection, nor simply punishment. They were a bridge, a connection between the wild and the human, a thread of life that bound her to something far larger than herself. You will face challenges still, the herbalist continued. Some you can anticipate, some you cannot. But remember, where the thorns lead, they do so with purpose. Trust, but also act with wisdom. Protect the innocent, punish only when necessary, and never forget that you carry both the forest's voice and its judgment. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge her, a subtle rustling that moved like wind through leaves and branches, and yet felt deliberate, intelligent. The thorns on her skin glowed softly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat and the whispering rhythm of the forest. She felt their thoughts, their intentions, their ancient memory intertwining with her own. Leora rose, feeling taller, stronger, and more certain than ever before. The forest had revealed its secret. The thorns were her teachers, her guardians, and the key to her destiny. To walk with them was to walk a path few humans could comprehend, a path of vigilance, courage, and reverence for life itself. As she descended the hill toward the village, the whispers of the thorns echoed in her mind. Protect. Endure. Learn. Guide. She knew now that she would never walk alone. The forest followed, and the thorns followed, carrying their memory, their wisdom, and their power with her. The villagers would see only the girl they knew transformed, the black thorns curling along her skin. But Leora understood the truth. She was more than human now. She was a bridge between worlds, a keeper of balance, and a guardian chosen by the very life force of the forest. And whatever came next, she would face it, guided by the thorns, protected by the forest, and strengthened by the ancient, enduring power that had chosen her. Dawn broke over the village, spilling golden light across rooftops and fields. The mist that often shrouded the morning had thinned, leaving a crisp clarity in the air. Leora stood at the edge of the square, her black thorns curling gently along her arms and legs, glinting faintly in the sun. Today felt different. A quiet, expectant energy hummed through the village, as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. The villagers began to gather, cautious at first, then with growing curiosity. Mothers held their children close, elders leaned on staffs, and even the hunters who had once feared her presence approached, nodding with respect. They had seen her trials, witnessed the Thorn's power, and survived the dangers the forest had sent. Now they understood that she was not merely a girl or a vessel of unknown magic. She was the bridge between their world and the untamed wild. Leora stepped forward, and the thorns along her skin shifted subtly, creating a soft lattice that shimmered in the early light. She raised her voice, calm yet commanding, carrying across the hushed crowd. The forest has chosen me, yes. But it does not seek vengeance. It seeks balance. We share this land. We are connected to the trees, the streams, the creatures that live beyond our sight. Ignoring them, harming them, or fearing them blindly, these actions bring danger. The villagers listened intently. Some nodded, others whispered prayers or muttered apologies to unseen forces. Leora allowed a small smile. The thorns pulsed faintly, a silent affirmation of her words. From today, she continued, we act together. The forest protects us, but we must respect it in return. We plant, we harvest carefully, we observe, and we listen. And I will guide you, teaching what I have learned. Fear no longer rules here. Harmony will. A murmur of agreement spread. Children ventured closer, eyes wide, fascinated by the living thorns. Leora knelt to their level, letting the black vines coil gently around her fingers. Do not fear what you do not understand, she said softly. Learn, watch, respect. The forest will teach you as it has taught me. The elders exchanged glances, finally breaking into smiles. Even the hunters, once skeptical and fearful, acknowledged her authority. Her presence alone, combined with the thorn's quiet, living power, had reshaped their understanding. Later, Leora walked through the village paths, the thorns trailing softly along her arms like living ink, leaving faint impressions in the sunlight. Wherever she stepped, small signs of life seemed to respond. Flowers turning toward her path, a gentle wind stirring, the scent of earth and growth stronger than before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those paying attention. She stopped at the edge of the forest, gazing into its shadowed depths. The black thorns along her arms pulsed with a soft rhythm, a heartbeat in sync with the unseen life within the woods. She understood now that the forest's gift was not simply protection or power, it was responsibility. She was its guardian, but also its messenger, a teacher of balance, and a living testament to the harmony that could exist between human and wild. The villagers watched her return from the forest each day, some leaving offerings of respect, others tending carefully to their gardens and fields, mindful of her teachings. Slowly, fear gave way to reverence, awe, and cooperation. The village thrived in ways it never had, guided by Leora and the silent counsel of the thorns. At night, she often walked alone beneath the canopy, listening to the whispers of the forest. The thorns shifted softly along her skin, reaching into the earth, feeling every root, every hidden stream, every living thing that stirred beneath her feet. She had become the bridge, the protector, and the guide. And as the first light of a new day filtered through the trees, Leora felt a deep, unshakable peace. The thorns had followed her home, yes, but in doing so they had made her more than herself. She had become a queen of the forest and the village, a symbol of balance, respect, and enduring resilience. Every step she took left an imprint not of destruction, but of life and harmony. The villagers would tell stories for generations of the girl who had returned from the thorn forest, marked and guided by its living power, teaching them that courage, respect, and understanding could tame even the wildest forces. The black thorns coiled gently around her arms as she walked through the village one last time that morning, their tips catching the sunlight like tiny stars. She smiled, knowing the forest had chosen well, and she, in turn, had chosen wisely. The thorns had followed her home, but together they had created a new world.